There is so much talk about where Florida State will end up landing, and not only where they'll end up landing, but who may accompany them when they land in a new conference. We have been very consistent, even really from last year on, that we thought 2024 would be the very last year that Florida State plays in the ACC, and that's not confirmed yet, but it is looking more and more likely. I think the percentages that we threw out last year were something like 85%. It would be 2024 as the last year, maybe like a 10% chance they could get out after 2023. Thought that was always really, really low. And then obviously once the deadline in August passed, we knew that that wasn't a chance. And then maybe a 5% chance that Florida State would play the 2025 season, right? And so then your 2026 year would be your first year out of the ACC. I still think that's pretty accurate. I think it might be like 90, 95% that Florida State's out after this 2024 year. And then maybe a 5-10% chance that they play one more season in the ACC in 2025, but then making 2026 your first year out. Whether that's the Big Ten or the SEC, who knows? We obviously certainly lean towards the Big Ten at this point. But there's been a lot of talk about potential partners, and maybe that's Clemson, maybe that's Miami, maybe that's North Carolina. You've heard Virginia tossed around. You've heard different things said, and at the end of the day, all of those would probably be fine. We'll talk about some maybe issues with each of those too, but honestly, I think Notre Dame makes the most sense, and it's not even really close. Now, I know what you're going to say. Notre Dame's independent. Notre Dame's not going anywhere. Notre Dame's not looking to move right now, TJ. What are you talking about? I think that's always been the thought. I think that's always been kind of the perception, but I do think things are changing very much right now. And I think the SEC and the Big Ten are about to force Notre Dame's hand. I think the college football playoff, we'll talk about that in just a moment, are going to force Notre Dame's hand. And I think Notre Dame is closer right now to joining a conference than they've ever been. I don't even think it takes a rocket scientist to think that. Even if you still say they're 5 years away from it or 10 years away from it or 20 years, well, they're certainly closer, but not necessarily in a time perspective. I just think they're closer from a mindset perspective to join than they've ever joined before. Why would Notre Dame make so much sense? Number one, it's the money. It is the money and the value that they bring to the conference. Florida State fans, I'll tell you this. I am the biggest homer that there is, but Notre Dame is the most valuable brand out there, and it's not close. Florida State is a second, without a doubt. And then third, it's not even close to that, right? Clemson, Miami, nobody really gets close to where Florida State and Notre Dame are. But Notre Dame is the most valuable brand out there. The Big Ten, if they could only add one team right now and Notre Dame was open and Florida State was open, I truly believe they would take Notre Dame. And that's not a shot at FSU, but they just make sense. They are the white whale of conference realignment. Their brand is massive. But what would you do if you were the Big Ten and you added Notre Dame and Florida State? I think you would overtake the SEC from a brand perspective in that scenario. Not necessarily success. I know it's been a long time since Notre Dame has won anything of relevance. I know it's been a long time since Notre Dame, really, obviously more than a decade since they've truly competed. And if you want to call what they did against Alabama in 2012 competing, then that's certainly okay. But it's been a while since Notre Dame had been nationally relevant or nationally competitive on the biggest stage. But from a brand perspective, if you add Florida State and Notre Dame to the Big Ten, it easily overtakes the SEC as the most powerful conference in the country. Honestly, when you look at Clemson, you look at Miami, you look at UNC, none of them are perfect fits. There are things that each one of them could possibly bring to a new conference, the SEC or the Big Ten, but none of them are just slam dunks that are perfect fits for really the Big Ten or the SEC. Clemson's academics aren't there. They're also starting to slide some. What is the perception of Clemson right now compared to what it was a few years ago? They've gone on streaks of losing a couple of games a year to now 2 and 3 games a year, and that continues to trend the wrong direction. I'm not saying that a 2-3 year span for Clemson completely eliminates them from possibly being in a better conference. I certainly don't think that at all. I think they will end up in the Big Ten or the SEC, probably the SEC. But I think that their value is dropping a little bit. Miami right now, again, in the 80s, in the 90s, in the early 2000s, would have been a phenomenal fit. They match up on some things when it comes to academics, investment in football is there. It's coming back, but just from an actual competitive standpoint, they haven't competed for anything in a quarter of a century. UNC doesn't have the investment in football, though they do have the academics and the brand. I don't think that they're a perfect fit for either conference. They're also tied to NC State right now, according to the North Carolina Board of Governors. And so there's no perfect fit. Notre Dame would be that perfect fit. Why would it make sense for Notre Dame to join the Big Ten with Florida State? We'll talk about that in just a minute. Do me a favor, if you haven't already, subscribe to our national channel. It's College Football Addiction. Done several videos over there. I know several of you are over there watching that content, checking it out. I'll link a video at the end so that you can subscribe there. But again, it's College Football Addiction. Make sure that you check that out. Link is right above. You can subscribe while you're watching the video. At the end of the day, for Notre Dame, it's about competing for championships. And I know that we like to get our jokes off. I know that we like to poke fun. I know that we like to say, "Oh, well, they haven't been relevant, or they haven't been nationally competing for champ." I get all that. But it's about to get even worse if they're not in a conference. There will be situations where Notre Dame is going to be left out of the playoffs. Did you see what happened to Florida State this year? I'm tired of rehashing that. I get it. And you guys are probably tired of listening to me whine about that. But that same scenario can happen for Notre Dame. And I know what you'll say out there. No way would they do that to that kind of brand. No way would they leave a Notre Dame out. No way would they ever do that. Put a 10-2 Notre Dame up against a 9-3 SEC, a 9-3 power brand, and see what happens. See what happens against a Big Ten team like Ohio State that may have 3 losses, or one of those big conference powers. Put one of those two teams up against a Notre Dame team that has a similar resume, a similar record, but didn't play in a conference championship, and see if the SEC and the Big Ten don't ensure that their team gets in. Don't ensure the extra tens of millions of dollars for their team qualifying for the playoff. You think it was just FSU this year that got screwed by the SEC? It will be any team that's not in the Big Ten or SEC going forward. This was not a one-year unique thing. If Notre Dame's hanging out around 11th or 12th, they're in a lot of trouble, especially if there's a lot of SEC teams that have similar records around them, Big Ten teams that have similar records around them. Obviously, Notre Dame cannot auto-qualify for the playoffs. You can only auto-qualify for the playoffs if you are a conference champion. Notre Dame's very best that they could do every single year is the 5th seed. The very best that they can ever hope for is the number 5 seed. They can go 12-0 every year, and you could have every single team in college football having 2 losses, and Notre Dame would still not get a 1-4 seed. And that's asinine. That's dumb. That's not how things should work. And you're going to get more auto-qualifiers coming soon with a revamped playoff. The SEC and the Big Ten were asking for 4 each. It is now down to 3 each, and then the ACC and the Big 12 would get 2 each. Well, there's 10 teams for you right there. And then you're also going to have a +1 with your group of 5 champion, and that leaves 1 spot for Notre Dame. You better hope that there isn't an SEC team or Big Ten team that's competing for you with you for that 1 spot. When mention of them joining a conference in the past has been brought up before, it's always been shut down, but not this time. Their AD has been virtually silent on it. Notre Dame is likely waiting on the ACC to collapse, and Florida State obviously has a massive hand in that. Whatever is going to happen with Florida State is going to put seismic waves between the ACC and other conferences. It's going to absolutely have them fall down a couple of rungs on the ladder. And is that when Notre Dame can jump? Can the conference collapse completely so that Notre Dame doesn't have to pay anything? Again, they're closer now to joining a conference than they've ever been. Is it actually happening? Will it actually go through? Will it be Notre Dame that is Florida State's travel partner? Will it be Notre Dame that's Florida State's rival? How cool would that be? You get to the Big Ten, and Notre Dame is the team that you are playing on an annual and consistent basis in conference. People have talked about Penn State. People have talked about, obviously, if Clemson or Miami or North Carolina were to join you, those would make a lot of sense. How cool would South Bend be every other year? Bringing that rivalry back, that 90s rivalry back. Obviously, you played a couple of times in the early 2000s. You've played a few times since Notre Dame got in the scheduling agreement with the ACC, but how cool would it be to do that on an annual basis? You guys may not believe me on the Notre Dame possibly making that jump. They may not believe that that is closer now than it's ever been, but I did dive a little bit more into that on our national channel, on College Football Addiction. If you haven't seen that video yet, you can click it right now on the screen to check it out. Make sure that you go subscribe to that channel as well. We appreciate you guys' support. We'll talk to you soon. Go Noles.